Here we go. Back in studio on a Thursday. We have moved from downtown Erie at the Erie Insurance Arena back into the Millennium Sound Studio tonight as our crazy week, excitingly crazy week of episodes continues. Welcome everybody inside for the Gem City Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by our friends at Revich Investments. They keep financial guidance simple and they do it well. If you want more information on Revich Investments and how you can get your financial guidance off to a good start, visit their website at www.revichinvestments.com or and call their number at 814-734-3433. 734-3433 is the number to dial. You might see that tonight I'm lone wolfing it in the studio. Paul Adams, Zach, Nick Artman, the night off tonight. Of course, if you missed our live episode last evening with the Erie Otters, we did a whole pregame episode there. Trevor Kubea, Tim Quinn were on. We talked all things Erie inside the Erie Insurance Arena. Again, special thanks to the Otters for making that happen last night. Make sure you check that out. We're live on YouTube tonight, X, Facebook, Twitch, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to like and subscribe our podcast network. I am alone in studio, but oh no, not to worry. I am not lone wolfing it on the show tonight because we got a lot of basketball to talk about, because after this week, it's playoffs, baby. The District 10 committee is going to be meeting this weekend. We're going to see the brackets, and we're finally going to get some answers as to who is in what position seeding-wise and how everything will play out ahead of the start of the postseason. So we'll be talking about that, and we'll pretty much essentially have the whole show be basketball this evening with all the fun things going on with high school basketball. So no one better than Tom Koval, former District 10 championship winning coach and a man who's still very much embedded in Erie County high school basketball, joining us tonight. Tom, no better time like this, right? Playoffs just around the corner. You still have a region game straggling here and there for some teams, but at this point, the resumes are kind of done and dusted, and now you just sit there and wait to see what seed you're going to be, especially if you're in one of those middle-tier classifications.
You're right. You know, my phone's blowing up here. I got a circle of coaches that I deal with. We're talking about some of the big games. Pat Flaherty's on my line here. We got some text messages about the big battle with Harbor Creek coming up in that region, which I think has some playoff implications. Coming down the stretch with all these region matchups, we get some really great games. Some region rivals, and it can really make a difference on whether you get into the playoffs or not, or whether you have that momentum going into playoffs, which can help you be successful.
So I'm curious because, as we've talked about, you're very much still in the coaching circle. And so for me, and I hate to play devil's advocate here, but, I could make the argument and any outsider could make the argument, well, unless it's for first in the region, these games don't really matter. What are these coaches discussing in your circles at this point in the season, whether it's what they want to see, whether it's what they're talking about for seeding? Take us kind of inside that discussion in terms of what coaches are saying and thinking at this point in the year.
Well, coaches are saying different things based on the situation they're in, right? We're trying to spin everything positive to our players because you want to be in a positive position as you roll into the playoffs, to have some momentum. I had a conversation with Callie Wheeler just a couple nights ago. I'm coaching her daughter in the travel team, and we were talking about their big win they had at Gannon. And we talked about how important it is to have some momentum going at the end of the season. And she's got some, I think, real 4 tough PSAC games coming up here. And we just talked about how important it is for kids, because even at the college level, right, they're still young too, to be positive and to have some confidence going into those games. With so much stress and so much pressure on you. If you're a senior, it could be your last game. So anything positive is such a huge deal. So just winning those last couple games, or sometimes even making the game close, so you're successful on the offensive end, can make a big difference going into the playoffs.
And we're going to see those brackets come out. We're going to talk a lot about that more so in the show in just a little bit. But we want to start with another one of Tom's topics. We introduced this last week. Got a lot of great discussion, and I think maybe some heated discussion, too. I like to try to play the other side of the coin. I'm going to do that again tonight because you and I have different opinions on this topic. Last week, we talked about, how much do you press late in games when you're ahead? How much are you fouling late in games when you're behind? All that jazz. I think this topic is appropriate tonight, Tom, because it always seems to be brought up around playoff time in high school basketball in Pennsylvania, and that is the shot clock. Should there be one or should there not be one? It is the chicken or the egg debate. And so I feel it's an appropriate time because, we have seen games, and it doesn't happen all the time, but I used to get increasingly frustrated when there would be playoff games where teams would take the ball off the opening tip, and for 2.5 to 3 minutes, they would sit there. And you would get no possessions back and forth, and you would get no up and down the floor. You wouldn't get yourself into the game, and it would just, in my opinion, make a difficult game.
Well, whose fault's that?
Well, I mean, it's the defense, but you have to give up a foul essentially to keep the game moving. Am I right? You have a different take on this than others, and I want to get to yours and what you think, because you probably are on the flip side of what a lot of people's immediate thought is to this question.
I might be, but I guess I look at it from a different view. The argument's on the other side. Let me be that guy right now. Well, we need to put a shot clock on because we got to get them ready for college. Well, I'm pretty sure 1% of all high school athletes go to play college basketball, and that's Division III, Division II, and Division I. So we want to change the whole game for 1% of the athletes. So I smash that one right away from the top. And then to go with what you brought up, and I agree with you. I hate when teams pull the ball out and just run the clock. But there's an easy way around that. Play man-to-man defense. Go up and pressure the ball. Make them make plays, right? I mean, there's virtually, now that Jim Boeheim's gone, there's virtually no zone at the college level Division I, right? All those teams are playing man-to-man for a great majority of their games. So if you're worried about that stoppage of play, like I see those clips posted by certain people all the time, like, look, they just ran 2 minutes off the clock. Well, don't sit back in a zone and go pressure the ball, and I bet you they'll have to dribble, or there'll be a 5-second call and you get the turnover.
So when we get into this, Tom, because you've coached and this game better than me, better than others, better than many. I look at it from an outside perspective, and when I'm on the sideline filming games or when I'm watching games, the first thing that comes to mind when attacking the argument that you make, which right, go man to man, which sure, you could absolutely 100% do that, and that would, in theory, take away the shot clock, issue or whatnot. But I think of that, my first response to that would be, well, you are forcing teams to switch their strategy right out of the gate for something that doesn't even involve strategy by the other team. I think the concern that I have with that argument is that if you're, say, a team that likes to play not even a zone defense, but a soft man-to-man, right? You don't want to necessarily go up and pressure the ball. Why should you be penalized, in essence, for switching strategies because a team is essentially just sitting there, and because of no shot clock, you have to switch what your strategy is and switch with what your game plan is? I just feel like if you're a team that is smart and you use the lack of shot clock to your advantage and you choose to sit there, you can bait a lot of teams into doing something dumb because it's not what they're used to. I just don't know if that's fair to essentially force teams to switch strategy off of not something caused by the other team, but of something caused by something that's not there in the shot clock.
Well, I'm going to go right back at you and say, if you put the shot clock in, you're forcing other teams to change their strategy. You're allowing teams to sit back in a zone knowing I don't have to pressure these guys at all. And after 30 seconds or 35 seconds, however much you want to put on the shot clock, they have to shoot it, right? So you're allowing them to have the advantage now. Now I can sit back in zone. I don't have to guard people man-to-man, which is real upper-level basketball. If you're going to play basketball in the future, you better know how to play man-to-man. So if you're going to put a shot clock on, I think that just benefits players that want to play in a zone, teams that want to play in a zone.
But if you put the shot clock in at the beginning of the season, it makes every team play by the same rule, right? So I mean, the argument that you could make with the shot clock not being on and it's fair for every team, you just make the same argument with the shot clock being on. And I think what it does is, I don't even really care about the teaching kids about the college level game, because I agree with you, right? Most kids don't go to play college basketball. I don't have an issue. That's not where my point is coming for the argument with the shot clock. I think what it forces teams to do with a shot clock in place is it forces you to be adaptable, which I don't know if there's that adaptability that you have when there's no shot clock. Not saying coaches can't be, but you just don't have that with the shot clock. And B, it allows games late. And this is where the crux of really where I go. Late in games, It allows the game to, I think, be more fluid, be more smooth, and it doesn't require you, if it's a 1 or a 2 point game, to have to foul to get the basketball back. And so I just feel like late in games, you implement a shot clock, and what you allow is you allow both teams a fairer opportunity without having to foul to have chances to win the basketball game. That for me is the biggest crux of my argument is late in games, because we see too often now where you got a minute and 15 seconds left to go. I mean, for example, tonight with the General McLean Fairview game, I was announcing the General McLean Fairview girls basketball game. You got a minute 15 to go. Fairview's up 6 or 7. And, General McLean's sitting there with a couple of team fouls. They needed to give 3 fouls at least to put Fairview in the bonus. And there was just no option for you to be able to guard, play stand-up defense, and have that opportunity to force a shot clock violation or force a shot. Fairview could just hold the ball. So I think it just makes games more competitive down the stretch because it forces you to shoot the basketball. That's where I'm getting at.
Well, that's one part of the argument that I'll agree with you on. Right, I think it would be beneficial for end of games, right, to go back and forth. As a coach, I also think it would be a lot of fun to incorporate the strategy, right? We're going to get 2 for 1 based on what the regulation clock is with the shot clock, or to be able to call quick hitters at the end of your offense when your motion doesn't work to try to get things. So there's definitely some parts in there that I like. Like, I'm not 100% against it. Right. But the big parts of the argument that we're getting them ready for college basketball, I actually think that that's wrong, because when you speed up the game so fast, right, and they're worried about shooting the ball, you get away from a lot of the fundamentals, right? Handling the ball, setting screens, coming off screens, some things that these high school players need to get better at to be able to translate, that they can apply that at the next level. And I think when you put the shot clock on, you're just going to make them play even faster than what they do. I'm pretty sure it was Michigan maybe that doesn't do it, and they did some research, and the average shot is being taken within 7 seconds of running your offense. So I don't ever see that it's really that much of a problem with teams holding the ball, except in those specific cases that you're talking about with strategy, right? I want to be able to make that team play man-to-man defense, right? If you put a shot clock in, that team allows that team to not do that, and they can play zone. So you just get a battle with that. I agree with your argument on the strategy at the end, but then in a traditional standpoint, you got to be able to step up and make free throws. Like, that's part of the game too that we've always grown up with. So I hate to try to change it and make it like college and make it like NBA, because I think we have a pretty good product already. If we would get rid of those Twitter, I guess we call it X now, those clips showing the team holding the ball for a whole quarter. And you know what? I've been there and done that. Right? I did that to Matt Jones when he was at East, and they wanted to sit in that zone because he didn't want to guard my dribble drive, right? And I didn't want to go up against his 3-2 because we don't shoot it well. So there was a battle, and as coaches, we love that. Like, now it comes down to one play, and to see how that works, So we weren't arguing as coaches, but you get the debate in the stands a little bit, and I understand it, but it's just a strategy thing. And I'm on the traditional side of it. I think you need to make free throws and play games that way.
So let me throw this at you, because I think part of the argument that maybe you're making, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the argument that you make is where we're at in Pennsylvania specifically. We know Erie County is more of a defensive-laden basketball district where you have to play stout D to win games. You're not going to win by scoring 60, 70 points. There are very few games that get there. I would actually argue, more than anything, that a shot clock is more paramount for Erie County than it would be for, say, the WPIAL in Pittsburgh. You see down there in the Pittsburgh area, and Tom, you know this better than I do, but I've seen enough games to know that's more fast-paced. It's more up-tempo. There's emphasis on offense and guard shooting from the wing. And so I think that's where the Michigan study would come more into play in Pennsylvania, where you're seeing in Pittsburgh, shots are going to be taken within, I would say, conservatively 12 to 15 seconds. So you can make the argument that for Pittsburgh, and that's kind of what I'm doing right now, the shot clock, even for Philadelphia, the shot clock is irrelevant because those guys are going to be putting up shots regardless. You're going to see more games in the 70s, maybe even some games in the 80s if you end up really getting a high-scoring game. Whereas for Erie County, which is more defensively laden, I think the shot clock pertains well to this area because there's more likelihood based on the strategy of the game in this area that you're going to have shot clock violations, that you're going to have teams hold the ball for 45 seconds, sometimes as much of a minute. Where do you stand on something like that? Am I far off with saying that I think more so Erie County should have a shot clock than even the leagues in, say, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, that like to run the floor and play fast?
I mean, I definitely get what you're saying. Erie or maybe Northwestern Pennsylvania has a more defensive-minded style. I think that depends a lot on the way our schools are set up, right? Like, there's not a lot of big schools in this area. There's 2 6A schools. I know when we transferred from Central to Erie, I changed a lot of the style that I did, as a coach. Instead of, the pack line defense that we did a ton with Central, we started to stretch things out, and it was more of a run and jump, scramble North Carolina defense, or maybe the havoc, the havoc defense from Virginia Tech. So, I mean, there's a lot of different strategies you can have, but you got to base that on the type of personnel you have. So with the smaller rural schools that have one really good scorer, I think those coaches coach to their personnel. I mean, we don't want to get rid of the Pat Flaherty's. Darren Mays did such a great job with the guys that he had. And Darren, you mentioned him. He was one of the most brutal guys defensively. I mean, they played such a deliberate style. And I can remember when he had the Rickard kid, and he really opened it up offensively because they had some more things. So I think you allow the coaches to make those adjustments in their team, as opposed to a rule and some kind of technology to change things. It's just the way I see it, I guess.
So let me throw this at you too, because you mentioned the classifications. I was going to go to this point too, for Pennsylvania specifically. And I even to an extent wouldn't like this, because it's not fair for every team in every school. But do you do something where you potentially implement a shot clock for 4A, 5A, 6A? I know you're going to have games that are non-classification games, but is there a way that you can incorporate a shot clock, say for those bigger schools, the Preps, the McDowells, the Eries and Meadvilles of the world, even Fairview, GM, Girard, whatever, that you maybe have a shot clock for those teams, but you don't for others? I mean, and I'm worried about even saying that, because, again, I know you want everything to be fair for teams, but is that the way that if they're going to implement a shot clock, that maybe you trial run it in the higher classifications first?
There's been a lot of studies with it. There's only 12 states. There's only 12 states in the United States that even use the shot clock. So I think that's a pretty good sign right there. But I don't know that I'd like to do that, because you want to keep things uniform. You want everybody playing the same way. When you have crossover games, if you're a really good small school and you want to play against a bigger school, you don't want to all of a sudden have to play by different rules. You want those constants so you can be comfortable and really work on things. So I don't know that would work. I understand that point, because maybe that's a little bit better for those styles, but I think it just comes down to the coaches. There was nothing better than Erie High going to Fairview and watching, Pat Flaherty try to slow the game down and make things really uncomfortable for our team. So we had to, make extra passes and really execute on offense and try to score. And then on my end, that first pass comes in and I'm running and jumping, we're trapping, and we're making you guys speed it up. We're trying to change the tempo in our favor. So I love the battles of that strategy, as opposed to, some square box that is telling us how much time's left and you got to work on them.
I get the feeling you and Pat have had in-depth conversations about this specific topic.
Well, I'll tell you what, my circle of coaches on the texting chain, we get into a lot of different topics. It can be interesting sometimes.
What do the coaches as a whole, a lot of the coaches in Erie County, are they on the same train as you? Do they feel differently? What would you say from the coach's perspective the overall moniker is on a shot clock?
I bet you it's really close to 50-50. There's pros and cons on both sides, and you can argue it both ways. What's the biggest con they always talk about that I don't even think of is the cost, right? Yeah. To put that technology in the schools, to hire another person to work that particular clock and train him. I mean, we have a really hard time getting officials now. It's going to be a hardship on some schools to come up with maybe not necessarily the money for the shot clock, but to find somebody that's trained, that's going to show up all the time and do that. There's definitely some hurdles to get around it. And I just love basketball, high school basketball, and I don't think you need to change a thing.
Yeah, and I think to come full circle on this, I think you make a good point, and I think you're right. High school basketball in this area is wonderful. I think, in my opinion, it's probably the most competitive sport in terms of number one to the lowest seed game by game. And I think if you're going to do a shot clock, I think number one, you should do it strategically. I would probably make the argument that if you're going to put one in, you probably want to start pretty high. I mean, I would say even somewhere in the vicinity of 40 to 45 seconds would probably be where I would look at number one. But again, I think you have to factor in, to your point, the strategy part of the game, and also too, like you mentioned, less than half the states in America have this. So I would personally be on board with it. It's so fascinating to hear from you that coaches are 50-50, and I think probably their strategy and how they play the game would also factor in as well. But one thing we know for sure, we're not going to see it in the playoffs this year. We're probably not going to see it in the playoffs till at least 5 to 10 years down the road. We may never see it, but it's just an interesting topic of conversation to have, Tom, because there's going to be a game in the postseason. We may be at it live, who knows, where you're going to have something like that where there's not going to be a shot taken until the clock's under 5 minutes in the first quarter.
Right. And I'm going to be yelling from the sidelines, go to man, pressure the ball.
Luckily, you didn't have to worry about that at Erie High. There was really none of that when you played McDowell in the championship game. And speaking of that, we're going to get into some playoff talk now in just a moment. That has been Tom's topic. We got another good one for you coming up next week and then the weeks to come as well as we get into playoffs. Hey, our show, by the way, as always, is sponsored by Rebridge Investments. They do keep financial guidance simple really, really well. If you want more information, head to their website, www.rebridgeinvestments.com, or you simply can give their phone number a call during normal business hours. 814-734-3433 is the number to dial. Again, 814-734-3433 is that number to dial. Rebridge Investments, keeping financial guidance simple. All right, let's talk playoffs, Tom, because the regular season's not done yet, but we have essentially just hours, if you really think about it, left to go until the committee will meet this weekend and the brackets will be revealed before next week begins. And I want to start where we've been starting all year, and that's really in 4A, boys, because it is a mess. And it's going to be a mess because there are 17 teams. Big question's going to be is how many teams does District 10 take? And I think you look at last year in the bracket that 4A had. Of course, you didn't have as many teams last year in 4A, but there was still a good amount. And you look at the way that bracket was concocted, and now you bring a lot of the teams from the 3A bracket, the Fairviews of the world, the Gerards of the world, who are also now part of this. If you were on the committee, Tom, and you look at 4A and the teams that are in it and the teams that realistically are deserving of making the postseason, what's the first thing that you do and how many teams are you taking?
Well, I think first and foremost, I wouldn't be on the committee because they probably wouldn't want to hear my opinions. It is very difficult, right? I look at it from a different perspective sometimes, and some of the things I might say tonight may hurt, some of my buddy coaches' feelings, or some parents of some kids, and it's just my opinion. So you don't have to agree with me. I'm just going to state what I think, but you look at 4A, any of these things are so dynamic because you got teams moving up from 3A from before, and now they're 4A, maybe some teams moving down. It's so hard to keep track of that. You can't just look at the regions because some of the regions have, teams with different classifications in. So it's tough. And when you look at the 4A teams, I mean, right, that's region 5, 6, 4, 5, and 6. There's 3 regions involved in that.
Yeah, and 7 with Cathedral Prep.
That's right. Prep went down. Yeah, I mean, that throws a wrench into everything. I mean, I try to break things down as I'm looking at them, and it's real difficult to go by records, right? I mean, there's some cut and dry ones. I mean, you can look at Gerard, who just came off a really big win at Fairview. It was a close one, right down to the end. Fairview had a chance to tie it a couple times, right? So that's a close rival game. But Gerard took care of business, right? They're 11-0 in their region. And I really have to look at Region 6 and say, hey, these 4A teams crossed over, and they played McDowell, they played Prep, they played Erie High, and they played Meadville, right? So there's 4 losses on a lot of those teams' schedules that shouldn't count. Right. I mean, that just shows the difference in their schedule to, somebody like, a good friend of mine, Mike Collette at Fort LaBeouf. Right. They're not playing those teams, which, I don't want them to. He probably doesn't want to either. Right. When they were in that region with us last year, I mean, that was real difficult because they were playing all those teams twice.
Right.
So I really think you have to incorporate the strength of schedule and who teams are playing. That comes to my mind right off the bat.
So when you look at these teams, and I guess you have to start at the top, right? Because to me, and this is just again my opinion, it's not a fact. I don't know more than everybody else. We're not claiming to know the secret sauce. We haven't watched every single game that these teams have played. But I think in 4A, the first thing that you have to do is you have to determine whether or not Cathedral Prep's deserving of the number 1 seed. And I think, again, like to your point, records to an extent out the window because of scheduling. Cathedral Prep is at this point 4 losses worse than Girard, but you have to play McDowell twice. They did beat McDowell once. It's only one of 3 losses on the season for the Trojans. You had to play Erie twice. You had to play Meadville twice. And then there have been a couple of games in crossover with region that Prep has played. What do you do with the top, Tom? Who in your mind is probably the number 1 seed? Is it Prep? Is it Girard? I think it's got to be one of those 2 teams, right? Unless I am just drastically missing something. All due respect to Warren, I think Warren's a really talented team, but I think it's got to be between one of those 2 teams. Am I wrong?
Yes, you're wrong.
Okay, and I've been wrong before.
Girard played Prep. They lost 71-27.
Yeah, it wasn't close.
So how can we even put that in the same category? If it was a close game and you said, Girard, they battle in the region, I give the edge to Girard, but you can't do that. And what a disservice, maybe you can blame it on District 10 that a 4A team like Cathedral Prep is not playing those region teams. We can't see how they fit in with them. For the most part. So it's hard to make a judgment, but just me knowing that region and knowing the players on the Prep team, they're better. They're better on paper. And what's the number 1 seed? It's the best team. I got to go with Cathedral Prep if I'm going to rank them in there.
Yeah, I think the head-to-head plays a part. The one thing that I would say, and knowing Mark Schreier as well as I do, and you know him too, obviously, Tom, but I will say that I think a lot that has to be factored into this as well. And I hate talking about the past, so I may contradict myself a bit. Mark Schreier is a hell of a playoff coach. We saw the run that he made to the state semifinals last year. He's doing this minus, of course, the graduations of guys like Nate Edwards and Jeremiah DeLomo. I think the one thing that is really going with Girard is the fact that they're undefeated in region play. That's a big part of it. But I also think, too, that they have been able to win in different ways this season. They have been able to put up 70 burgers a lot this season. They've been able to put up 80. They've also won games low scoring, as they did against Fairview back on Tuesday, which was a huge win, 45-43. They was able to edge that one out and sweep Fairview in the season series. I would agree. I think Prep is probably going to be 1. And then I think Girard, in my view, is you're looking at Girard, Warren probably for the 2nd, maybe Fort LaBeouf in there. But for me, I think the 2 seed is also important because that puts you on the other side of the bracket from Prep. Let's assume that District 10 takes 8 teams, as has been customary in 4A. Especially now with 17 teams. If that's the case, and Prep is over there at 1, you want number 2 because that puts you on the flip side of the bracket.
True. And I try to look at number 2 seed, and I'm not putting Warren in that. When I look at Warren's region, just not a strong region, right?
Yeah,
so I look at the record, which is great. Yeah, but not a strong region. If you ask me right off the top, who do I think the second best team is? I'm going with Sharon. If you look at the team Sharon played, Mars, Meadville, they did play Cathedral Prep. Beaver Falls, Warren Harding, Mohawk, which is a great team. They got a loaded schedule, and I think they're in probably 3rd place in their region. But Sharon did beat Hickory both times they played them. There's just so many ways to look at it. But I love the 2 guards. They got 2 guards that can really score, 2 senior guards. Derek Douglas and Levi Hallstock both average about 18 points a game. That's a real tough team to throw as a low seed. You know, and our team's going to be upset because the record's better. I guess you got, you know, what is your criteria? And I'm talking about head to head and big games and strength of schedule. And I got Prep at 1, Gerard probably at 2, Sharon right there at 3. You know, Sharon played Prep close, closer than the other guys. I think Prep beat, you know, Harbor Creek by 40. It beat Fairview by 35. You know, and they've got a blowout of Gerard too. So I think it's pretty cut and dry that Prep's the number 1 seed there, and then everybody else is battling from there. And you know, I think Hickory's a good team. The question is who you leaving out? You know, you got some bubble teams like Harbor Creek, Slippery Rock. You know, maybe Corey and Franklin. There's not enough room for them if we're taking 8 teams.
So let's get into that because, and it's so funny because we talk all the time about the Mercer County versus Erie County argument in football. Most of the time, in that case in football, Mercer County wins out. Now you ask yourself the question, for the 2 seed in all likelihood, who wins out, or even the 1 seed who wins out between Mercer County and Erie County. But we'll put that aside for a second. Let's debate how many teams District 10 takes. Now, I've been blowing this horn essentially since the beginning of the year. Me personally, I would love to see all 17 teams make it. I think you have a play-in for the 16 seed between 16 and 17, and then you just go full bore with 16 teams. Likely, I know that's not feasible. How many teams would you take, Tom? Because to your point, even the teams that are bubble teams at, let's say, 12 are probably deserving at making it into the tournament. How many teams would you take?
You know, when college football went to and expanded their playoff system, you know, you're never going to make everybody happy, right? And I think you can see that, you know, those big power schools are the ones that get in there and they deserve it. You got to stick with 8. I don't think you let teams that haven't shown that they really deserve to get in, like no questions asked. It's not fair to those teams that had a great regular season to possibly get upset because you're putting extra teams in there. Right, I think you devalue your regular season record and the games you're playing based on that. If you just let teams in because we want to put everybody in there, but that doesn't make it easy. When you look at, you know, Harbor Creek, boy, they you know, they're in that region that they crossed over. So you can't look at their record as much because they're playing 6A and 5A teams, but they have a huge game against Fairview tomorrow. Right, if they win that, I mean that's a statement game for them. Like, hey, we want in. We're going to go down at Fairview, right? And their last game of the season, and we're going to win because we want to get in the playoffs. So it'll be really interesting to see that. Talking to one of my, you know, little shout out to JT Del Sandro. He's 10 points away from 1,000 going into that game. You know, so that'll be interesting. You know, I'm sure Fairview, knowing how Harbor Creek scores through him a ton, they'd love to keep them to 9, right? That'd probably guarantee a victory for Fairview from that aspect. But I'm going to that game. I'm going to see it. That's going to be a battle, and I think it's a bubble game for Harbor Creek to see what happens there. Well, even if they do win.
For Fairview too, and not to cut you off, but you know, you look at Fairview, and I'm not saying that they're out of the tournament if they lose Friday, but man, you lose Friday to Harbor Creek, and now all of a sudden you're in a position where you could be a very low seed, and I don't want to say on the bubble, but you know, you're going to be close to there, because I think you look at 4A, and let's just say you take 8 teams, Tom, right? Prep is clearly in. Gerard's in, that's 2 from Region 6. Let's say we assume Fairview's in, that's going to be 3. Then you take Warren, Fort LaBeouf, Oil City, Hickory, Grove City, and Sharon, that's 9. Harbor Creek there at 10. You are going to leave out, if you take 8 teams, at least 2 to 3 legitimate, really good basketball teams. So it's going to be fascinating to see what the committee does, because if it is 8, you know, and I understand, again, you can't please everybody. You're leaving out some darn good basketball teams, man.
Listen, I tell my daughter Maria, like, I don't make mistakes often, but if I do, I'll tell you, right? And as I worked on this the last couple days, I got my 8 teams, which was Hickory, Grove City, Sharon, Gerard, Fairview, Warren, Fort LaBeouf, Oil City, and then 1 team on the bubble. But you know who I forgot?
Prep.
Prep. I completely forgot that they're 4A. You know, we could have a whole nother debate about that if we want to. I got a lot of prep friends that would like to fight me on that. But boy, that really bumps somebody out. Like, I'm thinking Harbor Creek's on the bubble. If they win, they're in, right? This is a big game. Like, oh,
Right.
prep bumps them out. Like, you know, it's hard to argue that Warren and Fort LaBeouf aren't getting in with their record. I know they have a weaker region, but they have an outstanding record. Oil City as well. So, you know, it looks tough if they only go with 8 for Harbor Creek, Slippery Rock, Corey, and Franklin to have a chance to get in there.
And that's what I'm saying for Fairview is not that I think they're going to be out of the tournament if they lose on Friday. That's not what I'm saying. But you look at how tight the margins are, and if you're Fairview, you lose a third region game. Now all of a sudden you're 14-8, you're 9-3 in region, and you're sitting there with Sharon, Grove City, who have 3 conference losses, and Hickory with their 2 conference losses, or to a 3 conference loss team. So you start doing all these permutations and combinations, and you think to yourself, and that's where the late stages of the season, to come full circle on our point earlier in the year, these games matter. I think, to your point, Fairview Harbor Creek is going to be a huge game tomorrow night. I also think, and this is something that I think we can look at as we get closer to playoff time. The big question for me is going to be, and you know, every year we have this discussion, right? How should we make scheduling? How should regions be put out there? How do we play the games to make it fair and to make it easy to manage come playoff time? I think in 4A next year, when you look at the 17 teams, it would be nice to have even more head-to-head between these teams than what we have already seen. You know, again, you do it as best you can, but I think that would help to eliminate a lot of this debate, because again, you're going to, like we said, we circle back, you're going to have at least 2 to 3 teams that are deserving that don't make it in if 8 is the number from the committee.
Yeah. I mean, and I know District 10 has a really hard job making these regions. You know, you hate to punish Region 6 by making them play Region 7, but Region 7 needs games, man. It's such a small region. I mean, when I was scheduling for Erie High, I mean, I'm going out looking for 16 independent games, which is impossible. And, you know, you have to play in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and those teams don't want to travel to you, right? Because they know you need the game. So you got to play late nights during the week down in Pittsburgh. Kids are getting home at midnight, and now we want to hold them to academic standards also. It's very difficult. So I think crossover games are good. You know, maybe you could spread them out a little bit more. To try to make it even, like maybe even get Region 5 and Region 6 crossing over with each other also. Do you have to play twice during the region? Although that's so much fun, right? You get to play, you build rivalries that way. I don't know exactly what the answer would be, but it makes it difficult come playoff time. Do you just go like the NCAA and throw a big tournament up there for your region and let's go, right? You know, win or go home, you know, survive in advance.
It would just be so interesting. I just think for me personally, it would be so intriguing to see a 16-team tournament, because then you could, you know, it'd be like March Madness. It would be like what you see out of the Whippeal. And I think that would be something that we don't traditionally see in District 10. And for me, it would be exciting. I don't know whether or not the teams are going to like it, because then you got to win 4 games to win the district championship. But again, we'll see what the committee does. It's just going to be that is going to be such an interesting discussion in Class 4A. There are other discussions in other classifications as well on the boys' side, but that's really the crux of what we're looking at.
I will say this: when people talk to me about how much fun the coaching was, I can remember the days before Erie consolidated, and we had, I know, East and Central. We had Harbor Creek and General McLean. You know, all the, I guess we were 3A schools back there when there was just four levels of classification. We had all those teams, and when playoff time came, we're playing against Meadville, Hickory, and all those teams down in the South, Farrell. It was such a cool thing to come into that big tournament against teams that you didn't play. You know, we would meet at the All-Star committee for the city-county game, and we're all trading film at that point because, you know, we're playing against teams that we never saw before. And it was really a really cool atmosphere to have to go through that to win District 10, where you have, you know, and shoot, you know, I love playing against Kevin O'Connor and McDowell in the District 10 championship, but when it's just one game, it takes a little bit of the fun out of it. One of the guys in my coaching circle, he claims that you never earn a district championship. He played one game, Tom, one game. So there's different ways to look at it, but I don't know what the answer is, but I think it would be fun to throw all those teams together and see who comes out on top.
Yeah, and again, I just think for parity's sake, it's exciting for fans. It's exciting for essentially anybody who has this opportunity now to be able to play in the tournament. All right, let's flip the script and go to girls basketball. I do think it is important that we mention this on the girls' side first, because we haven't talked a lot about 6A, because traditionally it's been McDowell and Erie, but now all of a sudden you throw Warren into the mix. It would have been intriguing today if Warren would have beat McDowell to even the season series, what the argument would have been to who faces Erie in the 6A girls championship. McDowell getting the 39-35. That's boys basketball. My apologies. So I have the wrong game here. Right now, McDowell girls basketball taking on Warren earlier tonight. I'm checking the McDowell girls basketball page. I don't know, Tom, if you have a score from that game between McDowell and Warren. I was looking at the boys basketball score.
I do not. No, I haven't seen that come in yet. I do know they were playing tonight, but I did not see that score come in yet.
Okay, so as of right now, we don't know exactly how that game went down. We'll see if we can get a score once we hit the end of the show here. But that's an important game, because if Warren is able to come away with a win there, then you have an argument as to who faces Erie in the D-10 6A championship between McDowell and Warren. So both teams coming into that game via go Erie 1-4 in the region. McDowell does have 4 fewer wins coming into that game than the Warren Dragons, so we'll see how that game played out. But that's, again, a good conversation to have for 6A. A couple of other things to note as well on the girls' side. Northwestern beats Mercyhurst Prep tonight. The Wildcats finished the season undefeated, which is significant because, again, you want to be playing your best basketball coming into the postseason, and Northwestern finishes what is that perfect regular season at 22-0. And so now Michaela Presser-Palmer and head coach Steve Sowin come into the postseason undefeated in the game. Okay, so we're getting a comment here from Melissa Height saying the McDowell-Warren game was postponed. That's interesting. I didn't see that one. So if that is the case, then they're going to have to play again sometime, because that's essentially playing to get to the District 10 championship game.
Yes, yeah.
So we'll see. Go ahead.
I know the first game was not close at all.
Yeah.
Which is funny. As a coach, like, I'll get on Max Preps and I'll look at the scores. Oh, they beat us by this many and we beat that team. And you try to figure things out, and it's really difficult to do because I think they played Erie High really close. I think it was just a 3-point game or a 5-point game last time Warren played at Erie High. But when they played McDowell, they lost by 30 some points. So on any given night, you don't know what's going to happen, and matchups are so different with different teams. Some teams just match up better with others. So we'll just have to see how that plays out when they make that game up.
Yeah, and it is on the McDowell website, officially postponed. My apologies, I hadn't seen that one tonight. But again, that was a huge game where 6A is concerned, and again, girls basketball playoffs will also get started next week as well. Wanted to ask you, Tom, before we go here, because there is, I think, maybe one more category that you have to consider in the girls basketball side of things, and that for me would be what you do in Class 3A. You look at this Mercyhurst Prep Seneca. I think it's, for me, it's straightforward, but the big question is, what do you do after Northwestern? Is it Mercyhurst Prep then Seneca? Where do the other teams fall in? How would you look at 3A for girls basketball? Because again, you still have Girard in there, Greenville there as well.
I mean, yeah, Seneca, boy, Steve Carter's doing a great job. They just had that battle with Northwestern the other night when we were on. So they played Northwestern really tough. Those girls play hard. They swept Mercyhurst Prep, if I believe. Seneca did. So,
they did.
So I think
yes.
So it's pretty clear cut where they're at right now. I think it's going to come down. I'd love to see it come down to another Seneca in Northwestern battle. If we can get a close game like that, that's really fun come playoff time. I don't know that any other team really gets in the mix with those guys.
Yeah, and I think, and again, first of all, congratulations to Northwestern for the undefeated regular season. It's not going to matter to them if they don't get into the state playoffs, but that's going to be big to look at in 3A. 4A is going to be an interesting classification as well, with Fairview getting the win over General McLean tonight. It was a battle. Aaron Garrity's team had to scrap and claw. They were tied at the half. Ended up winning that game by 9 down the stretch with a couple of big defensive plays. So they are now sitting in a good place to be the number 1 seed. So a lot of questions that we will have coming into the weekend for the District 10 basketball committee, Tom. But I think what will be even the more intriguing, in addition to who gets in, is the matchups. Because, coming full circle back to 4A, this is going to be a classification where if it is 8 teams, it would not be crazy surprising to see multiple lower seeds beat top seeds in that first round.
Yeah, but just so many unknowns. Like, I'm sure, my phone's blowing up. Mike Coletta's probably getting on my case right now with talking about his region being weak. But you don't know, because those teams didn't play against each other, and it comes down to the confidence at the end of the season. I mean, LaBeouf has won a ton of games, so those guys are really going. Pape just went over 1,000 points, so there's a lot of energy going through that program right now. So who they get matched up with, that could be a tough matchup. They got some guards that can score out there, and if you can score in a playoff game, you're trouble to play against. I would love to see the committee match teams up with, maybe even if you just switch up the seeds a little bit so they're not playing teams within their region in the first round. Really stagger that so they can get to play against some teams that they haven't played. I know as a coach, that's a lot of fun to prepare for a team that you haven't played yet before. You can really run your stuff and not be battling against a team that's seen you twice already or watched so much film because you're playing in their region. So hopefully we get some really good matchups when they put those brackets together.
It's good that we get to pull Tom into the drama of the seeding now this year, because for many years he didn't have any drama at all. He got to prepare for one team, and that was that. So now we get to finally introduce you to the seeding and all that fun stuff, but it'll all be decided this weekend.
Yes.
Hopefully Go ahead.
So a good quote from Mike Pisano when he was the principal at Erie High. As soon as the season started, like, Tom, you got one game to worry about. That's it.
Sometimes it's easier than that. It's as easy as that. Straightforward, right?
He thinks it's very easy. Basketball is just not the same like it was in the 90s.
Yeah, well, and a lot of people say that, but, sometimes change is a good thing, and I will say that from the bottom of my heart. Well, this has been a good episode. Hopefully we were able to give some insight as to what we think the committee may do coming up this weekend. We have no idea. That's the really big thing, is we don't know what they're going to do, how many teams they're going to take, what the seeding is going to be, but we can't wait to react to it coming up next week. We do have an episode coming up tomorrow night. Paul Adams X, the draft podcast, happening tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. He's going to be talking about running backs ahead of the NFL draft, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Well, let's see how it plays out, Tom. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I know for you tomorrow, Fairview Harbor Creek, huge game, so make sure to enjoy that, and we'll see if Harbor Creek can make a case for themselves heading into the tournament. Yeah, I look forward to it. I used to be on the Harbor Creek staff when I first started coaching. Ryan Smock was actually on my staff at Central. I live in the Fairview School District, and I'm coaching Pat Flaherty's son in the YMCA League with my son, so there's all kinds of crossover there. Whoever loses, I probably won't talk to them for, a couple weeks. They'll probably be burying their head in the sand. But I hope it's a really close game, and it'll be fun to see who comes out on top. 2 degrees of separation in Erie County when it comes to who knows who around this area. All right, we are back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. We'll be back to break all the playoff stuff down coming up on Flagship City Sports Talk on Monday. Enjoy your Thursday.